guys, welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be working in my sketchbook today. So I was having a little bit of a hard time trying to think of what medium I wanted to do today's little drawing session in. So on the left side you can see that I had a few like doodles or scribbles of Masaki, and they have a bit of like a similar theme of previous sketches that I've done in a previous sketchbook of Masaki wearing kind of like this face mask with flowers kind of peering through. So I kind of wanted to tackle that concept today, but just as something in my sketchbook rather than something digitally or with watercolor or something that I would consider like more of a finished piece. So I'm going to use this one more of an kind of like experimental one. So for this, I decided to do the sketch with the Color ENO first as usual, just so we can get some basic groundwork done, and then we will switch into the Prismacolor Col-Eraser to do kind of more fine lines or like finished lines, so I know where I'm going to be placing colors. Now my options for adding colors to this piece was actually between either alcohol markers or colored pencils, because I could go with a more smoother and more kind of almost like digital look with the alcohol markers, or I could go something a little bit more softer, a little bit more textured by using the pencil crayons. But I decided that I'm going to just pick and choose a bunch of different mediums and see what I think fits in terms of coloring. So I think for the most part, I'm going to be using the alcohol markers because I kind of want a bit of a smoother application at first. And I was kind of a bit timid on trying to do the whole thing with like pencil crayons. So I was thinking maybe I'll do base tones with the alcohol markers and then add pencil crayon on top. But in the end, I actually ended up doing the majority of the coloring with the alcohol markers. Now, I haven't done a test page for this sketchbook. I've used some other sketchbooks with a very similar paper type, so I knew how it was going to behave for the most part, but I haven't really used alcohol markers in those sketchbooks. Like, I rarely used alcohol markers previously, so I was a little bit worried on how this would behave. Now for the most part, because I was working with the skin first, I actually had no issues. So I started off with a simple base tone for just the base of the skin, just kind of a light peach color. And then I went in with a bit of a darker peach and then a pink, and then some purples. And yeah, I think that's about it for the skin though. So we're just gonna kind of breeze through probably the majority of the skin coloring, since I feel like sometimes the skin portion just gets a little bit repetitive. Oh, I didn't mention this, by the way. I'm drawing my OC Masaki. Probably should have said that at the very beginning. And like I said, I always wanted to do a concept where it looks like Masaki's kind of like peeling back a face mask, and underneath the face mask kind of has these like little flowers. Now the problem I'm gonna run into is one, when I'm coloring the eyes, the buildup of the ink is going to be a little bit difficult to work with, because I actually didn't realize this, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But for the entire piece, I did not have a solid plan going in. I had the concept and the sketches just like laid out, but I didn't think too much about like the color palette itself. So the colors are going to look a little bit all over the place, and because I was doing section by section, I wasn't really keeping in mind about like a whole color palette. I feel like I can wing a color palette when I'm doing it with digital, even though I work in section by section, but it's easy for me to add in subtract color easily. But for traditional mediums, other than like painting probably, it's harder for me to adjust the colors as I go. So I probably should have picked out like a color palette, or thought a little bit more carefully about the color palette that I want to use, because this one looks very, I don't know, scattered, and some things look out of place. Okay, so for the eyes, like I was saying, I had a bit of an issue with the ink. So alcohol marker, for the most part, I have no issues of it like smearing or anything like that. But I noticed that as I was layering the colors on the eyes, you'll see I go over it several times, and I kind of have this really dark green now laid on the eyes. I decided that I wanted to smooth it out with another marker in between, just to make the center part a little bit softer, which you can see that it's been done. Now what I accidentally cut out was that if you look very closely to the eye on the right side of the page, there's a bit of like a smudge of green right on the outer portion of his eye. You can barely see it because I did my best to smooth it out, but it was because my hand laid right into the ink of where his eye, like his eye line is on his right eye. So yeah, it was still wet, which was a little bit weird. So I think it's because I put too much buildup of ink in a short period of time without letting it dry. I noticed that this paper almost has a bit of a shinier coating to it, which I never really noticed. Like I said, I don't usually use alcohol markers on this type of paper anyways, and if I do, it's usually like a single pass and I do lines and pencil work on top. I kind of used it more as like flat color if anything. But because of these markers, I was layering up quite a bit because I usually add like a base tone and then I add a mid-tone, another mid-tone, and a few darker colors on top just to kind of push that value. And I guess I pushed it too much on the eyes because it did not dry until a little bit later. So yeah, and it kind of has the sheen to it. So I kind of noticed that the paper itself is a little bit, like I said, it's like super smooth and it's almost, I don't know, it's not glossy technically, but there is a little bit of a sheen to it, which I think it looks nice with other mediums, and sometimes maybe that's why some of my inks might not dry as quickly. But on paper that's like much more absorbent, I think the ink would have had an easier time being able to, what is it called, like dry faster on the paper because it's being absorbed immediately. But this one let it sit for a bit on the top surface, which kind of led to this weird texture kind of. I think some other sketchbooks get this too. When I lay too much water on the page, it kind of speckles. This one doesn't have it too much and it's quite an even texture, so it doesn't really bother me. I just have to be a little bit mindful when layering up some colors. So for his mask, instead of black or white or like a pattern or anything, I decided to go with a more kind of like foresty dark pale green, if that makes sense, for his mask, because I wanted it to be dark enough because I wanted the flowers and stuff to be a lot lighter. But then I kind of forgot about his outfit. So Masaki usually wears the kind of turquoise teal turtleneck, but I didn't really think about that, so I didn't want his mask to be too similar in color, so I'm going to choose a different color for his sweater. And after I did the mask, I felt a little bit more confident in working with the hair. So luckily, because the paper doesn't absorb the ink super quickly, it actually made it quite easy for me to blend colors out, especially at the edges and stuff. So I was able to get some nice gradients from like the different parts of his hair, or even like where the hair reaches his face, and I usually make that softer. It's just something I really like, so I think I was able to achieve like looks that I would really like. I kind of left things a little bit more choppier or like not smoothed out on the mask itself, just because I didn't want too much ink buildup, but as well as I kind of like the triangle, what is it called, like shapes that I have going for the mask to indicate like clothing folds or like folds in the mask anyways. But for the skin and the hair, sometimes I like things looking quite smooth, and I tried my best to layer some pale greens into his hair so it doesn't look too flat. And I think that would have been better if I also planned out, like I said, the whole color palette prior, so I could have added maybe other colors that were present in the piece into his hair before going all into just like pure browns. So usually when I use any kind of like alcohol markers, I'm not too sure how some other people approach it. I'm not sure if like, do you usually go dark and then go to a mid-tone, then your lighter color to get a gradation in terms of like you're only kind of blending out the edges, or do you constantly like layer the whole thing? Because I noticed sometimes I would layer an area and then it will be almost immediately covered by the mid-tone quite a bit, except for like a little portion. And I'm wondering if I should be able to save ink if I reduce the amount of area I use with the base color. But I guess like if you're layering, it would affect the colors underneath, so, or the colors underneath would affect the colors on top because they kind of peep through. So maybe I have to do a little bit of experimenting with these markers, if anything. But you know, I think it's fun to dabble into some of these mediums from time to time. Also, little mini update in terms of, I think I mentioned this in some past videos that I wanted to do some 3D art. I know some people were thinking, oh, you can just use Blender, but I wanted to learn how to do 3D art like with my hands, like physically, like traditionally, because I feel like that's something I struggle with quite a bit, or at least like I definitely did during my times in university. Sculpture class was like the one I hated the most, and I definitely was probably the bottom of my class, if not like, yeah, probably the bottom of the class, if anything, because I just had a hard time. I didn't understand how to carve things out of like a block, adding things. I overly smooth things over so things look a little bit uncanny too, so it got into a weird thing. But I did order a cheap thing of clay. It's very small, so we'll give that a go someday. And I did buy air dry clay because, like I said, I don't want to commit to ruining the oven. And I might have to go into the basement to go check if I actually still have some of my clay tools from when I was in university. So in university, when I took a sculpture class, I think I took a 300 level. So it's basically just like the intro class to sculpture. But because it's like a 300 level, which is basically the second step to the course after fundamentals, we were thrown in, and I have all these supplies from it. I had buckets, I had like spray bottles, we had sponges, we had silicone, we had, I don't even know what else, we had dish soap and a bunch of other things we had to use. But other things we had was obviously sandpaper and these clay tools. So I want to see if I still have them because I definitely think they'll be helpful. I do have like some small clay tools. I think you guys might have seen it if you've seen my watercoloring videos where I used more of my watercolor inks, I think they're called, or liquid watercolors. Yeah, they're called liquid watercolors. And I would use these little clay tools. We have little metal balls at the end of them and use them to mix up my little liquid watercolor instead of using like toothpicks or anything else, because I didn't want to use anything disposable to mix them, and cleaning the metal tip was a lot easier. So I do have those to help potentially with making things out of clay. We'll see. I might do like some trial runs off camera before we tackle anything, because like I said, my goal is to make a character. I'm not too sure if I want to make it like a Genshin character or I want to make it probably Masaki or any of my OCs, depending on how successful I can do this, because I would like to paint them after too, and make them look a little bit more finished. But I want like a little sitting chibi character who can just like sit on my desk. Now I don't know if I want it to be like sitting as his like legs are dangling, or sitting as like maybe cross-legged or just like huddled up. I think some people have seen those characters. I think it's like Demon Slayer, Chainsaw Man, what else is the other one? Fushiguro is from, oh my god, I'm blanking on the name. I'm really blanking on the name, no. It's the one with Sukuna too. I'll put it on the screen, but there's like a bunch of them where they're kind of like little chibi characters looking up, and they're kind of like sitting with their legs tucked into their chest, and it's super cute. I kind of want something like that, not like in that style or like specifically that pose, but I want something kind of like that small. It's similar, I guess they'll be smaller than my needle felted characters, but if I get confident enough, I would like to do other characters like standing and stuff. But knowing myself, I don't know if I'll be able to succeed with that, because like I said, I struggle with 3D quite a bit. Okay, so back to the drawing portion. So like I mentioned, the colors are a little bit kind of scattered. So I have these blue, I think they're Himalayan poppies, I might be mistaken, at the bottom. Now I just threw these in last minute because I knew I liked them, but they didn't match the flowers in the masks, nor did they really fit the color scheme overall. Masaki is very more earth toned, and I could have pulled more blues if I would liked, but I should have planned that from the start. Like I could have made his mask a bit more of a cooler color, a little bit more vibrant, and made more of the flowers in his mask match the blue a little bit or complement the blue. I could have used the blues and the yellows and whites, probably to make it suit. But for some reason, for his mask, like the little flowers, I decided to go with like Easter colors, which made it seem very out of place. Probably because it doesn't really suit Masaki either, because the overall color palette, like I said, is a little bit more like earth toned. Yeah, that's something I didn't really consider, and I think it's quite obvious. But for the line work, so like I said, I'm treating this more like a mixed media piece, so I'm just kind of picking and pulling stuff that I have laying around. So obviously I use the Magicfly fineliners, so these are dual-ended, but I am using the fineliner side. Now I've been using these ones a lot because they have such a large range of colors. I think I did a video about these as well, where I used them to help outline watercolor pieces, and I've done this with like marker doodling. I also use them for marker doodling, for Copic markers and stuff as well, watercolor, anything like that sort. And I think it really helps with being able to match your line art to the different areas of your piece where you kind of want the color to match a little bit closer to make it basically have a what am I saying? A softer look, because I didn't really want to use just like a pure black line work, even though it probably would have looked nice, but I want softer effect. So last thing I'm going to add is some pencil crayons or colored pencils for you Americans, but I decided that I was just going to pull out some of the more red tones in his face. I kind of chose the wrong color, so he kind of looks like he has orange eyeshadow. I was trying to find a more lighter red or dark pink so I could darken up the crease of his eyes, because usually when I draw Masaki, I draw him with hooded eyelids, just because like I think drawing 17, a lot of them have like hooded double eyelid kind of situation. I think it's mostly hooded eyelids. I also have hooded eyelids, so I tend to draw them a lot. So I gave Masaki them, but because he's kind of looking down a little bit, and I thought that would help not create that crease in his eye, so it kind of makes it look like he just has a normal double eyelid, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know how exactly hooded eyelids work. I don't really wear makeup on my eyes, because it usually disappears anyway, because the hood of the lid just covers it all. I just don't like wearing eye makeup in general, other than like brown eyeliner from time to time. But adding some details to the poppies, I actually really like how this looks, so I wanted something a little bit more softer and easier to use, to add a little bit of extra shading, like I said, but also to add a little bit of texture, which I think the flowers kind of needed, and it kind of helps bring out the shape of the flowers a lot. So I really like how it looks, adding these little lines to the ends of where the highlight is, because it helps it make the flowers just look a little bit more voluminous. I tried adding a little bit of pink to the upper portion of his iris, but it's very subtle and very hard to see, so probably doesn't really stand out. Like I said, I made his sweater a different color to kind of help with the contrast for the mask and the flowers. This is also the amount of bleed through from the back. I did put a protective sheet on the back, but I don't think it was really needed, as there was not too much bleed through in terms of to the other page. So pretty much yeah, the thicker paper worked out nicely. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's session, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!